Hey, what's up, everybody? What's happening? Today's quick conversation is about the secret plan to end slavery versus a Black history reader. All right. So I got the book here from Dr. Claud Anderson, which I believe has some it has some non-facts in it. Okay. And I want to go to page 69. Which we're going to put on the screen. You will see one of the highlights says the Supreme Court as the self-appointed guardian of the racial status quo and champion of white superiority. There's another highlight that we have that says the court's members have been guardians of white superiority appointed to maintain the social and economic privileges of the white race. Supreme Court jurors for the first 100 years were slaveholders. Okay, so what we have to understand is the British colonies, because that's what they were. The British colonies had slaves, and it was never the intention of the United States of America once these 13 colonies declared that they wanted to be separate and have their own thing. Slavery was not something that was a part of this new would-be country. Okay? They didn't want to have nothing to do with this. In fact, I'll point your attention to the Articles of Association 1774, and we coming straight from Congress as the source, and not what nobody else said. In clause number 2, it flat out tells you that they want to have nothing to do with slavery come this upcoming December. Slavery will have no place here. Okay? All right? We want to totally do away with the system. This is before the American Revolutionary War. So when you understand history, we have to start here in 1774 because this is the first document that shows the anti-slave sentiment. Now, there's two people who are very important, who would become important in the future, okay, in 20 plus years coming, okay? And those two people you would know as George Washington, your first president, and John Adams, your second president, have their signatures on the 1774 Articles of Association. Again, that's saying we don't want to have nothing to do with slavery, King George. Okay? All right? So now we got the intention of our founding fathers. Two of them. Okay? Now, you have to understand that the British colonies have two mindsets. One is pro-slavery, which we know we later identified as the southern region in the Southern Confederate mainly, right? And the ones that was really about it, right? And then you had the northeast corner that was more of freedom, although slavery was allowed. It wasn't the actual practice of business like it was in the South. Okay, so we have to understand that. So we have two mindsets, pro-slavery and anti-slavery in British colonial America, in the colonies. Okay, you got to understand that. All right, so now since this statement is talking about the Supreme Court is pretty much the guardian of white superiority, bullcrap. Okay, it was never the intention of the Supreme Court. How do we know this? Well, look at who George Washington, first president, who we just saw in the Articles of Association, who said we don't want to have nothing to do with slavery. Look who he appointed as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay. Did Jay have slaves? It says so. Here's the thing. You have to understand that slavery is an inherited system, okay? Now, John Jay would be the creator of the New York Manumission Society that was all about the freeing of slaves in New York. This is your first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Literally created the New York Manumissions Society to free slaves. So even though he had slaves, because that whole system is something that was inherited, you understand, whether it came from King George, and whether your daddy and your mama had slaves and you growing up as a little kid, this is the status quo. This is the norm. So you can actually have slaves, but you can have a anti-slave mentality to say, you know what, this bothers me. I'm about to manumit them. I'm about to free them. It bothers me so much, I'm about to create an organization that is going to free the slaves. You understand what I'm saying? And that's what the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court did. Now, when John Jay was no longer in office as the Chief Supreme Court Justice, right, John Rutledge became the Chief Justice. John Rutledge is from South Carolina. South Carolina is really the state that started the Civil War. Okay, this is super duper slave territory here. And although he may say he was against slavery, he was a slaveholder, and he also defended slave owners in court against slaves. Okay, but guess what? He wasn't confirmed for the nomination of Chief Justice. That's very interesting. So if the Supreme Court is the guardian of white supremacy and superiority, why did they not confirm a founding father, because he's a founding father who was pro-slavery? Interesting. And guess what? George Washington actually wanted William Cushing from Massachusetts to be the next Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, who was William Cushing? William Cushing, when he was in the Massachusetts Supreme Court, he actually ruled in a slave case by a slave by the name of Quock Walker. Now, Quock Walker's case is interesting because it was 3 cases that took place, 3 different incidents. Quock Walker, owner, was a guy. He died, and his widowed wife went to a new husband. And so Quock Walker went with him. Quock Walker ran away from the widowed husband and ran to his former slave master's brothers. Okay? The new slave master finds Quock beating and wants to put him back in slavery. So they go to court over this issue. So Quock Walker's case is like, yo, they beat me. And the court rules in Quock Walker's favor and say, hey, you beat him, you have to pay like 50 shillings at the time. So then Quock Walker is, the new slave owner is like, the new husband slave owner is like, okay, well, I'm going to file a court case that these 2 brothers of my wife's ex-husband, they interfered with my property and they owe me money. And so then the court ruled in his favor. So now we have 2 opposing rulings here. The first ruling in favor of the slave, Quock Walker, that the new husband shouldn't have beat him and tried to put him back in slavery. The second ruling rules in favor of the new husband and says, hey, the ex-husband brothers, y'all wrong for interfering with property. So now this goes to a third case, which now is going to be heard by William Cushing. William Cushing says, listen, according to the new Massachusetts Constitution, slavery is incompatible with this new Constitution. And therefore, this whole Quock Walker thing is over. Why would George Washington want to appoint another, because he did John Jay, which we basically see John Jay's an abolitionist. Why would he appoint another person, another Chief Supreme Court Justice, who was anti-slave as Chief Justice. Why would he do that? Mind you, George Washington in 94, if I'm not mistaken, signed a law that made it illegal for the United States government to export slaves out of the country. This is like 1794, 93, 94 in that pocket, right? So we have to really know what the true history is, okay? And this is why I'm working on the piece that you see here, The Secret Plan to End Slavery, breaking the curse, because it's a curse that's upon us. History, Black America, and all Americans need to know, okay? So when we hear things like the Supreme Court is the guardian of white supremacy, no, it's not. We have to understand that there's always been two ideologies in America. And just because they ruled against Dred Scott at that particular time, majority of the justices were absolutely Confederate in their ideology, Southerner in their ideology, because there's actually two justices who dissented and didn't agree with the Dred Scott ruling and ruled in favor of Dred Scott. And nobody talks about that. One of them being McLean. And McLean is interesting because he's from Ohio. Okay, he's from my home turf. And this has always been the place where the slaves ran to get free. This is you cross that Ohio River. The Ohio was that territory that marked the line in the sand. Ooh, and I can't wait till I get to the Missouri Compromise to show you what's happening. There's two different ideologies here. And one of the first lines in the sand that was drawn was the Ohio River. No slaves are allowed in a new territory that's north of the Ohio River. That will be west of the Alleghenies, i.e. Pittsburgh, right? Pennsylvania area, or west of the Mississippi, i.e. Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. This territory is known as the Northwest Ordinance. And this went into effect before the founding fathers even created and signed the Constitution of America. Yes, and I'll give you a bonus. If you look at Mississippi's secession speech, when Mississippi decided to try to leave the United States of America, their secession speech that we're going to get from Yale, they said, the United States government has always interfered with the institution of slavery. The federal government has always interfered with the institution of slavery. They did so by the Northwest Ordinance. This is what Mississippi said. Mississippi said this. See, I'm not going to quote from a book by somebody else and what somebody else said, right? Because this book, he's quoting people, okay? I'm taking you directly to source documents of what the Congress have and what the states have, or what universities have that's obviously that's in the Congress, okay? And so Mississippi is saying the federal government has always been against the institution of slavery. Now, who should I believe? Should I believe people who got facts distorted and it's just flat out wrong? Or should I believe Mississippi who actually participated in having slaves? So much so, they wanted to leave the United States of America and form the Confederate States of America so they could have slavery. They told us the federal government has always interfered with the institution of slavery. But yet, before the federal government was formed, as I showed you earlier in the Articles of Association, George Washington and Adams, who would later become your first and second president of this federal government, they signed off on documents that wanted to end slavery. This is the real hidden truth. This is the real power that we need to know and we need to know who is who and what this story is really all about. All right. So subscribe, share with a friend, get with me. And on a whole nother note, because I'm a real estate investor, I get into that and spirituality. Check me out on Patreon. All right.